Welcome to Keep Smiling, the e-commerce customer experience podcast. Selling products online is challenging and can lead to poor experiences. We explore how entrepreneurs and organizations create better experiences for the people they serve. Amazon, Shopify, artificial intelligence, we'll discuss what matters today and what you can do to build a better e-commerce business. Hello, listeners, and thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Ty Walters, and joining me again is my co-host, Michael Melgar.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great day.
Today, we have a featured guest, Shannon Roddy. Shannon is the founder of Marketplace Seller Courses. They're online courses, resources, and tools for brand selling on Amazon. Shannon has worked with over 85 brands, manufacturers, and private labels to set up, optimize, and launch their products on Amazon. The course was built on his 7 years of Amazon consulting knowledge that helped launch over 23 number one new releases, 4 number one bestsellers, and 29 Amazon Choice products. Shannon, that's an amazing repertoire of accomplishments there. Perhaps more amazing is the fun fact that we asked about before the recording. Can you tell us at least 1 or 2 fun facts about yourself?
Yeah, so one of them is that I learned to pick locks in high school. I taught myself. They have library books that just teach you this, and I'm like, man, that's amazing. It's free. So, and then the second is that I learned to speak Swahili when my wife and I spent some time overseas in East Africa. So, conversational Swahili. I'm not fluent, but it's really fun to be able to communicate people in whatever language they communicate in wherever you happen to travel. So
outside of Amazon, if we need help, maybe like we got locked out of our house, or we need to speak with Swahili, we'll come to Shannon.
Awesome. And thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. So
yeah, thanks for joining us, Shannon. This is the first time that we've featured you on the podcast, but not too long ago, we had a video recording with Shannon. We hosted a webinar about how to create a sales boosting customer service experience. You hosted us there. Now you're featured on us and you're coming back to our show because from the moment that we met, even several years before that recording, I think we both understood that we understand the importance of customer experience and customer service, especially as it pertains to the e-commerce world. I think you have a natural drive to help and impact people based on some of the service trips that you were describing before. And that energy emanates from you and it does from Michael, which is sort of why I see the similarities between us all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's more than just sales. It's about really resonating with people and building authentic relationship. And, you can do that through customer service. And so for me, it's something that we're all super, super passionate about. I would just say fanatical about it. And, when it's sort of ingrained in part of your character or part of your personality, it can be a lot of fun. And I'm really excited to talk to people today. And specifically, any brand owner or seller who has need for customer service, talk about what some of those key attributes are for hiring and then creating a culture and cultivating an atmosphere of phenomenal customer service experience. So,
yeah, when we invited you to be on the podcast, we really wanted to cover a topic that you felt energetic and engaged about and that you felt sellers really needed to know. I think this topic is an underemphasized one, the emotional component of connecting with your customer, even when it's in a digital landscape like online shopping. The last thing I need to say is we're going to end the episode today by telling you how you can follow up with Shannon. He's a very active guy in the space. He just wrapped up a recent e-com boot camp where he held an exclusive event for food brands and food sellers on Amazon. So I'm sure you're going to be coming out with more unique events like that in the future. So definitely follow Shannon for more to come.
Yeah, we've got a couple in the pipeline already. I can't talk about them yet, but it's really exciting to be able to focus on a specific niche and really deep dive into the Amazon platform and just provide people with a lot of great content.
Nice. So Shannon, let's kick it off. The first point we wanted to cover here is the importance of creating an emotional connection. Why is that emotional connection so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking about it, getting ready for the podcast, this idea that 99.9% of the time, we don't have an opportunity to engage with our customers. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Like we've worked so hard to create or build a product or, in some cases a service, but, for e-commerce, it's some type of physical product. And yet almost I said 99% of the time, we never even engage with those people. We never see them. We never meet them. If we sell that product like in Target, we're not hanging out in the aisles of Target, waiting for customers to come by, pick up the product and ask them, hey, like, do you have any questions? Or, if they buy it, like, hey, can I like follow you out of the store and at home and like see how you use it? Or can you tell me if you've used it before and get some feedback? Like, we just don't have those opportunities. And customer service really is like this amazing gateway directly to our customer, where they're reaching out to us or we're reaching out to them and they're reciprocating. And it's one of the only times that we get that direct contact with customers. And if you think about it, the greatness of any brand isn't the product that they sell. It's the emotional connection that customers have with that brand and product. And, the two most prominent examples that I can think of are Coca-Cola and Apple. I mean, those are they're so huge. They're so powerful. When they decided to do New Coke, people were like devastated. People were writing hate mail to Coca-Cola because they're like, you can't take our drink away. Like, I shared my first Coke with my grandfather before he passed away. And, I had a Coca-Cola after every one of my pregnancies. Like, this was not just about a product. It was about the emotional experience that they had with the brand as a whole. And Apple was able to do the same thing. They were the only company to make computers cool, in that era. And so I think that from one of the books that I read recently, Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, it's just repetitively ingrained in me that in order to have an incredible customer experience, you have to know your customer. You have to relate to them. You have to engage with them. And when so many companies are outsourcing all their customer service to somebody who's going to get off the phone with them as soon as possible, give them as little information as possible, help them as little as possible, we're really doing a disservice, because the reality is we want those opportunities. It's what creates longevity in terms of customer loyalty. It's not about the product. It's about how they feel about the brand, and how they feel about the brand starts with that emotional connection.
I think we couldn't agree more. And I wanted to hit on what you said about maybe in a typical situation, there is this idea that customer service is going to be bad. Whenever a customer needs to reach out to a company, they think they're going to be on the phone forever, or be with someone who doesn't speak their language, or it's going to take multiple interactions to get the help that they deserve. And which is really sad, because like you've described, it's this amazing gateway or an opportunity to learn from customers and to improve our own businesses. But since the bar is so low, I like the way Michael describes this, is that customer service is this unique selling proposition, this competitive advantage a business can have if it's good, and especially if word about it being so good spreads.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And the reality is it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be a unique value proposition to have good customer service. That should be a given. Unfortunately, it's not. But at the same time, that gives every company that believes in customer service a huge leg up and a competitive advantage. So, some of the companies that I love and follow that are just diehard customer service, Southwest is another one. Zappos was the one I already mentioned. They are just so about the customer service experience that I think they hold true to what customer service is supposed to be, which is serve the customer. And I think a lot of times we forget that root meaning, that customer service doesn't mean outsource to somebody who doesn't care, who has never seen my product, who has no idea how to use it, and is not empowered to do anything to actually help me. That it actually means serving the customer. Like, I love that line from, I think it's Jim Carrey in The Mask, when he's watching some mugging happening in the alley and he yells to the police officer. He's like, come on, man, serve and protect.
Excellent reference.
It's like, that's what you're supposed to do. This is customer service. You're supposed to serve the customer. I mean, it's so basic. And yet so many companies, you see don't doing it. And I think that customers have come to expect a poor customer service experience and won't even reach out to the company. They go on social media and complain about it and blast the company. If they thought they could pick up the phone and easily solve the problem, they would, but they don't even think that's an option anymore.
Or they'll go to the Amazon product reviews or your seller feedback, and then it becomes this public problem. And the funny thing is that you're absolutely right, Shannon. Something that we try to do at SellerSmile, and something that we've ingrained into our culture, is just this heavy emphasis and importance in great excellent customer service, like digging into the deep mechanics of it and what that actually entails, because it tends to be dismissed as, oh, it's just answering messages. That is like one small tip of the iceberg, right? But there's so much more to it, and you're totally right. The people who are doing it well, who really care, they're the ones who are not seeing the negativity over and over again. They're the ones handling it as like almost a PR move.
Yeah. I mean, again, you think about it as a brand owner or company owner, 95% of your customers will never, ever meet you, but they will engage with your customer service. So if that's not the face of the company, like, I don't know what is. It's not the advertising. People remember advertising, but what they remember with an emotional aspect is the customer service experience they had.
Right. You have a quote here. It says, companies care about customers, but people care about people. I wanted to highlight that because Michael and I had a previous discussion. The nuance of using different words changes the meaning of the sentence. Companies care about customers. That seems more transactional, less personal, but people caring about people gives it that emotional context. How do you think companies can start doing this more, and why do you think they're failing? Why do you think it's difficult or not important enough to do?
Well, one, I mean, I think it comes down to sort of character and culture, right? We have to believe in customer service. We have to think it's important, and then we have to invest in it. Like anything, if you want it to be successful, you have to invest in it. And in his book, Delivering Happiness, Tony Hsieh talks about this idea of they had tried outsourcing some of their core competencies like shipping, and it was a disaster. So they realized if we want to be about customer service, we have to do that in-house. And we have to be willing to hire and fire based on that value. So, it starts with the leader of an organization. An organization can only be as healthy as the top leader allows it to be. So I think that's key. But, in terms of the engagement, there's really two parts of it. And the first is that authenticity creates trust, but personality creates engagement. So authenticity just means we're being real with people. If somebody says, hey, I got the product and, I couldn't figure out how to use it, just empathizing and go, yeah, hey, I'm so sorry that happened. The first time I tried to use that product, I actually had the same experience. And it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting the person to say that, but it's authentic and it's real. And because it's real, they start to trust you. And of course, obviously that should be done with the core of authenticity and character. But the personality is the other part. I love Southwest because they allow their employees and their flight attendants and pilots to have a lot of fun. They allow their personality to shine through. They don't make them sort of fit into a box. And so there was one of the early ads for Southwest. They were, looking for flight attendants, and it had a picture of like a T-Rex dinosaur. And there was like crayon markings all outside, like inside the dinosaur and outside and all over the page. And it said, from an early age, Tony showed an adeptness to working with Southwest because he was like willing to go outside the lines, And it was kind of this fun, engaging thing of like, wow, I could be myself there. And so one of the funniest experiences I had, I think I was flying to Boulder last month. So I'm flying to Denver. And the flight attendant goes, and you never hear this like on another airline, but the flight attendant goes, everybody, I want to make sure that you are buckled up safely. Make sure that your seatbelt is strapped on tightly. We're going to take off in a few minutes, and the captain's going to try something new. And like the entire plane had like this inhale and then just erupted in laughter because it was so funny. And you just don't expect people to do that, but allowing people to have personality and not just have everything be generic and standard and template. That's boring. It's not engaging. And so again, the authenticity is needed to create trust, but the personality creates engagement. It makes it fun. I mean, that was a flight that was 6 weeks ago, and I still remember it because they didn't sort of shackle their employees into only being able to say, this is the pre-written defined thing, and like have some fun with it.
Exactly. Now you're here telling us about it, and I kind of want to, get on a Southwest flight just to kind of hear some of those things,
My wife and I fly Southwest almost exclusively because it's just such a great experience. And we've had them say things like, we're going to now dim the lights in the cabin to make your airline attendants appear more attractive. Little fun things like that are memorable, right? And it makes them seem like people instead of robots, instead of, employees. And I think that's part of the engagement part, is creating that system. So we're going to get into talking about hiring, but then also creating this environment, which is so crucial for long-term customer service success.
Shannon, it's something I wanted to add to that. We actually recently interviewed someone named Matt Patterson of Help Scout. He works with their marketing team, and he's kind of helped build customer service teams in the past. And he's touched on this, exactly what you're referring to, where in Help Scout, for example, they don't call their messages, they don't call them tickets, they call them conversations, because they want the agent, they want the person using it to look at that as a two-way conversation versus like just a ticket that you have to resolve.
Yeah. I mean, we could dive into this. I'll mention it briefly just because it's fascinating. But Dan Ariely wrote a book called Predictably Irrational and talked about this idea of social value versus market value. And market value is very much transactional. I give you money, you give me milk, we're done. I take my milk home, I go and I eat my cereal, right? But the social value is about doing things for the community because we're there, because we're supposed to, because we ought to. And it's something that a lot of people don't tie into, but the social value is so impactful. And that's what creates that emotional engagement again as well, where you're doing something because you don't just care about them as a customer, right? The transactional piece, but you're a person caring about another person. And that's the social value aspect of it. And that's why hiring the right people is so critical.
Shannon, you've convinced me. I definitely want to hire people that are authentic and have great personalities because I can see that advantage. Where do I start? Where do I begin? How do I screen this? Because Michael and I went through several rounds of hiring in 2018, and albeit it was our first time doing so, I think it's an arduous process. It's difficult to get right. Do you have any tips when it comes to finding and winning the right people for your team?
Yeah, so we have what I refer to just as the 3 C's of hiring. This actually came from a book called Courageous Leadership by Bill Hybels, and he talks about the hiring process. And the 3 C's are character, competency, and chemistry. And you have to have them in that order. There's a lot of companies that go, wow, this guy's an amazing sales rep, or this person's really good at this part of their job, but they're really irritating, or they're not completely honest, or they show up late to work, or they can't seem to ever quite finish that project on time. Those are all things that you need to be very wary of and make sure that you're hiring people based on that criteria. So character obviously just has to do with the foundational level of character and integrity, right? They're going to be who they say they are, and they're going to do the honest thing and the right thing. Competency obviously has to do with follow-up. In customer service, it's critical. You can't just be like, oh, I forgot to get back to that person. I mean, obviously systems play into this, but there's always a level of competency with a person, even just to show up and deliver and do their job. And then the third part is that chemistry part of it, which is, do they gel with the team, right? Do they get the culture of what you're about? And I think, in some ways, chemistry and culture can be almost synonymous. Culture is really the ongoing values of the company, but chemistry is, hey, are they fun to work with? I mean, you're going to have to work with these people. They're going to have to work with your customers. You want to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience. So starting with those 3 C's, I think is really the most important part. And then, for customer service companies in particular, for that role, you have to hire people who are passionate about customer service and love helping people. If you don't have that aspect of it, you can't train that. Like, that's just not something that you can add on later after the fact.
Yeah, there's a certain element of empathy that all great customer service reps have. Some of them have them in bigger spurts, some of them have them in less, but there can be a different mixture of skill sets. Someone might be more technical, someone might be better at composing a response, someone might be better on the phones, things like that. But at the very core, people who are great at customer service find empathy a very, very important value.
Yeah. I mean, look at StrengthsFinder. I don't know if you guys have used StrengthsFinder 2.0, but I love it. It's a great book. I mean, buy the book, you take the test online. It kind of gives you your top 5 strengths. Empathy is one of those available strengths. It's not mine. Mine is competition, but it doesn't mean I'm not empathic. But again, understanding what people naturally defer to. I love how Jim Collins, author of Good to Great, puts it. It's about how you're encoded, right? And certain people are encoded to just sort of default to a certain thing. And Becca Dunn, who's one of my favorite customer service reps, who I've worked with on several Amazon, consulting projects, her default, what she loves to do every day is just help people. And I've had her help with some other projects outside of that scope, like research and that kind of thing. And it just doesn't drive her. It doesn't motivate her. Like, she can do it and she can get it done. But what she loves to do is like jump on her computer, jump on the phone and help somebody. And those are the kind of people that you need on your team. So again, pulling from a scenario from Good to Great, he was talking to, I believe, like a military recruiter. And he said, how do you train the Marine culture, for example, for people who sign up and enroll and enlist? And the guy said, we don't. He said, we attract people who already have the Marine culture built into them, and then we train them to be Marines. And I think that's a really important difference, that your goal is to have a company and a culture that attracts the right type of people who have that level of empathy and love working with people. You can train them on the technical stuff. Like, you guys have systems that you use, you have tools and resources that they're going to have to be able to be somewhat technically adept at. You can learn the platforms like Amazon or eBay or Walmart, Shopify, whatever those are. Those are things that can be learned. What you can't do is somebody who's good at all the marketplaces, but doesn't have the empathy and the desire to help people. It's simply never going to work. And I've worked with companies that it was maybe like somebody who was doing customer service part-time, a bunch of different people who were all helping out with it. In one case, it was like the boss's wife who also did the accounting. And literally every time somebody wanted to return something, she was like, I can't believe they want to return it. It's going to cost us $13. Like, fighting with the customers, like, that's never going to work. You have to find the right people who are encoded for this, that this is how they're wired. And then you can train them on the platforms and train them on the product lines and the products that you sell, how to use them or how to fix issues that customers may encounter.
I remember during my time at Seller Labs, we were even kind of skewed or kind of preferred to not hire part-time agents, primarily because of that dedication, right? Because if someone's going to be part-time, they might still do a good job, right? But it's not going to be the same level of dedication and desire to be there, because it's just not their focus.
Sure, absolutely.
I wanted to revisit a little bit about the Marines example in terms of, it's not about finding Marines, it's about attracting them. I think from an e-commerce company's perspective, if you're having difficulty finding these types of people, that probably means maybe you're not putting that message out enough from the materials that you generate. Does your website communicate that you're passionate about customers and helping people? Do you have core values or a mission statement for your company that lists some of those items? Because I remember during our hiring process, I was surprised by how many applicants were referring to the kind of interactive nature and the lightheartedness of our entire process. So it was reinforcement that we were doing the right thing because we were engaging those people. But I love that flipping the expectation around from finding those people to attracting them. That's excellent.
Yeah. I mean, again, look at Zappos as a company that they've created such a strong culture that people want to work with a company. They go, man, if I can be empowered and like go to work and not have a script and have fun and like not goof off, but like be able to be myself, again, going back to that authentic part, not being shackled, personality wise, and really have fun with it. They offer people $2,000 to quit within their first few weeks of training. And it's their way of weeding out people who really aren't interested in working for the company. I love that innovative hiring. It's such a cool tactic. And it really does put the test to people like, are you really wanting to be part of this company long-term? Or, yeah, I'm just looking for a job. Because they're not interested in people who are looking for a job. They're looking at people who are going to be committed to the cause that they champion, which is customer service. And I think Tony in one interview said, we're not a shoe company, we're a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. And, again, framing that, like, what a cool concept to make that the highlight of your brand is customer service and customer experience.
If you start with that in mind, building your team from the get-go with some of these things being an important part of what you do, then you can use that like in your job listings and your job description. That's kind of what we did at SellerSmile. And especially if you're a small seller, you might not have things like a set of core values that for a fact you abide by. And so the funny thing is that even like at SellerSmile, again, it was a bit of a learning process for us. But what we found is that our really good hires helped us shape what our current core values are. Mm-hmm. And especially at the size of many e-commerce sellers, getting them in now is something that can even help shape what your culture will be.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you hire people with at least with a level of character competency and some chemistry, then it's about getting the right people on the bus. And then you decide where you're going to go. So Zappos was around for several years, getting the right people on the bus before they decided, hey, you know what? Let's really make this about customer service. So I think that's cool that, yes, you can develop and shift your culture over time. But once you kind of hone in on that, you've got to be adamant about enforcing that. A couple other fun sort of, interview tactics or tips, things that I've learned in research on innovative companies and that operate with a high level of customer service. One was Southwest, and it was a test, but it wasn't what people thought it was. So everybody they brought in maybe 5 to 7 people into a room, and you're going to give a 2-minute presentation. So people would sit down and they'd be watching the person who was presenting, and, people would be, okay, kind of practicing my next thing. I'm up next kind of thing. They weren't looking for the presentation. They didn't even care about the presentation. What they were watching was if the people who were sitting in the chairs were engaged in watching the person who was presenting, or sort of selfishly working on preparing their presentation to go up next. And it was one of those things, it's like, oh my gosh. But it uncovered people who were like so enthusiastic about supporting the other person who was getting the attention, as opposed to, I'm focusing on me. I got to be working on me so that my presentation's better, so that I can knock this out of the park. And it was this really fascinating way of, again, sort of weeding out people who didn't fit the culture that they were trying to, incorporate into the business. And then the second one is actually from the military, and it was the Alamo Scouts. And it was this amazing group of scouts under General MacArthur. And what they did was they had all the recruits come in, and after they went through the initial interview process, they said, you know what, take a night off. And they put board games out and let them just kind of hang out, and you guys can kind of do your own thing. And what they did was they went through the room and watched how people engaged with the other officers and soldiers. And if there were bullies, guys who were like trying to crush or push down, or, you could tell they were super aggressive and competitive, they were basically watching for that while these guys were playing board games, checkers and Monopoly and poker and that kind of thing. And the next morning, they sent all of those guys home. And they basically said, like, we don't want people who are going to be bullies on the team. We want people who are committed to the other people on their team, just like Southwest was. So again, these sort of really fascinating ways of how do you weed out the wrong people in addition to attracting the right people?
I like that, Shannon. A quote that comes to mind, I'm not going to be able to identify the source, but it's how you do one thing is how you do everything. And in both of these examples, they're not trying to replicate the conditions of the job to test them at that type of proficiency, but they're putting them in a off-guard situation, and they're seeing how they perform listening, how they perform playing in competitive games. And that tells them about the character, about the nature of the individual.
Yeah, very much so. Once you've hired, the right people, how do you create an environment that's actually going to allow that to be sustainable? You can't hire the most amazing, customer service person and then put them in a really restrictive environment where they can only use specific templates. They can only communicate with certain phrases. Everything has to be from a script, because that basically defeats everything that we talked about from the beginning, which is that personality creates engagement or creating an emotional connection with your customers. So kind of looking at what are the 3 key aspects of giving your customer service reps the opportunity to create those emotional connections.
And it's funny you say that, Shannon, because again, Matt Patterson of Help Scout, he even mentioned that how you can have the best customer service team in the world, but if the leadership isn't really taking into account the things that are important, such as offering excellent customer service, there's only so much that they can do, and their job kind of becomes null.
I like your emphasis on autonomy and giving the freedom to your customer service team to show their personality and to interact. On the other side of that, there is a certain liability of making sure they say the right things and they're not misleading the customer. But I believe a talented individual will be able to discern, see the nuance in the situation, know when a certain aspect of a message needs to follow a close template, and other aspects like the greeting or the closing of the message can show that connection and emotional side.
Yeah. And again, sort of operating freedom within a framework. So, Jim Collins has this great example in Good to Great, talking about airline pilots, right? They've got a lot of autonomy in terms of things they do with the flight, making sure that certain things are done, the way they need them to be prior to takeoff, but they also have to go through the pre-flight checklist. Like, they can't just ignore that, right? At the same time, they get up and they go, okay, you know what? We're hitting some bumpy weather at this altitude. Let's go ahead and change altitude. That's operating within bounds, right? So it's freedom and autonomy within some boundaries. That's necessary for every job. Of course, you're going to have that. You can't just sort of fly off the handle. The goal is really finding people who are trustworthy enough that, you can be essentially careless. They're trained and they're trusted. And if you have somebody who's trained and trusted, 99% of the time, they're going to make the right decision. And giving them that freedom is worth the 1% if they make a mistake or do something wrong. It's better than doing everything wrong by policy. I mean, that would kind of be my take. From a culture standpoint, I love Pixar. When they were looking to merge or be bought out by Disney, they actually had several, conversations prior to the sale about how they would preserve the Pixar culture because it was so valuable. It was so important. They didn't want to lose that. And so one of the things that they say is, giving people freedom is so important. Like we provide huge safety nets for people to make mistakes, like it's not like you make a mistake and you're out. Southwest is the same thing. We're going to provide you, freedom and opportunity. And they said, we will always back you. If you make an error, but it's in favor of the customer, then you've done the right thing. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you guys, give the guy a full refund or, whatever the thing that was. But if it was in favor of the customer, there's grace. And they said, we believe that giving people freedom is more important than completely controlling every action and missing out on those, those few opportunities where maybe they went overboard or went a little outside the bounds. That's just part of living in life. But I know for myself, I certainly appreciate freedom and autonomy in my job, and working with customers or clients or bosses in that capacity. It's so much better even to have a couple mistakes made than to have a situation where no autonomy and no freedom is given, because essentially you're going to hamstring your ability to engage with your customers.
Shannon, this is a sort of a question I tossed in there last second, but in this context, SellerSmile's first and second hire were people that we had worked with in the past. So that gave us the advantage of knowing their character, knowing their competency, knowing if there's chemistry there. And they still work with us today, and everything's going great. But sometimes when people hire friends or family, it can turn for the worse. Maybe there's a disagreement and personal relationships are affected. Do you have a stance on that either way? Do you personally like to avoid hiring friends and family, or if they're the best fit for the job, do you proceed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I hired one of my friend's dads once to do some executive assistant stuff. And we just basically had a really upfront conversation beforehand. And I said, look, if at some point this doesn't work out, if at some point things change and I have to let your dad go, we just have to have that set in stone. That's not going to affect our relationship in any way. And I had the same conversation with the dad. I said, this is purely business. We'll communicate about stuff. And it wound up being that, several months later, I wound up hiring somebody else and I did let him go. And I think just being really upfront about that and saying, yes, we're friends, or in some cases, yeah, we might be family, but this part of it, we kind of have to segment off a little bit, and it has to be business. And, certainly there could be cases where there's going to be hurt feelings or that kind of thing. But I think boundaries, again, is just really, really important. You have to use a lot of wisdom. If people have a high level of competency and a high level of character and trust, there's usually not an issue. I typically only run into problems when there's a mediocre level of competency or character. And that's when you have problems. So I've worked, in companies with some of my best friends, and it usually just means we have to have really open, honest dialogues when something's challenging us, because those are definitely going to come up. Those are definitely going to happen, and sort of being committed to that. But, if somebody doesn't really have the competency that you need, it pretty much just never works. So I don't think there's a right or wrong or a bad or good answer, but if you stick to those 3 C's and are willing to have honest conversations quickly, it can work. And the second part is, the second somebody's not going to work out, you have to let them go. You have to fire them. You have to make that change. It allows them to get on with their life. It allows you to find a replacement. And that just requires character, on the standpoint of a leader. There's so many ways that leaders can talk themselves out of firing somebody or letting somebody go who's no longer right for the company. And it could be that they were right for a season or a period. Andy Stanley talks about having to fire volunteers who, literally help build the organization that you're in. And you go, yeah, but we now have people who are more capable and more competent than you. And even though you started and it's a volunteer position, you're not even getting paid, you're no longer capable of meeting the level of excellence that we require. And we're going to have to ask you to step down. Those are really hard conversations, but you have to do it. You have to be, committed to A-game players, people who are willing to give their best level, and that's going to meet the level that the organization wants to operate at.
I really like that concept. I envision it as an all-for-one type of mentality, like a colony of ants. They'll sacrifice themselves to preserve the colony or the queen or whatever it might be. And like you said, those are very difficult decisions, usually decisions that are better made by someone with higher character. But you have to disappoint people. Tears are going to flow. People are going to be sad, upset, mad. But if it's for the better interest of the culture or the organization as a whole, and it'll allow it to move forward and innovate and keep existing, I think that's what really matters.
Yeah, I mean, because a culture can erode quickly. Once you start bringing in people that don't really fit the culture and that kind of thing, then it starts to change. And then you have good people who don't really want to work there anymore. You know, again, quoting Jim Collins the entire episode, but the best way to keep your best people is not burden them with people who can't keep up. And you know, so you absolutely have to make that decision. And that's for every part, obviously, not just, you know, your customer service, but the willingness to hire and fire based on your core values and principles is critical. And if you know somebody's not meeting it, you got to step up and you got to say something and do something. To create an environment for outstanding customer service, there's 3 really critical components. Number 1 is autonomy, giving people the opportunity to do their job in the way that they see fit. And again, you're already hiring people of good character and good competency and good chemistry. It's just giving them some freedom within that structure to make a good decision. Freedom to engage with the customer, to make a decision instead of having to ask for permission for everything, right? Companies create policies of what you can and can't do to deal with the 5% of incompetent people. 95% of the people don't need a policy. They just know it's really stupid to do that. And, you know, we all know if we've worked at a company where you show up Monday morning and there's a new memo out about a new policy and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Joe did that, because now nobody can do this ever again because somebody abused it or did the wrong thing. And the last thing is empowerment. People have to have the ability to be empowered to make a decision, because a lot of times with customer service, there's a financial aspect to that, right? It might be sending a customer a replacement. It might be refunding shipping. It might be overnighting a product to the customer. Those are all financial decisions. And if you don't entrust them and don't empower them to make those decisions, they're not able to do the customer service. It's sort of like, well, we'll have to check with the manager and get back to you. And that's just belabored with, you know, bureaucracy and hierarchy. And all that does is, again, prevent the customer from being served. So if you can operate with autonomy and freedom and empowerment, you're going to be able to create a sustainable culture with the people that you've hired, which is completely rooted in trust and based on the character and the people you've hired.
It's very difficult to scale a business in which there's only one decision maker. Empowering your team to make the smaller decisions keeps everything moving, and especially if they're of high character, high competency, your business will be in good hands. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. You always bring so much energy and excellent insight into the world of customer service, customer experience, especially how e-commerce sellers should be thinking about their business. Where can our audience go to connect more with you and Marketplace Seller Courses?
Yeah, so marketplacesellercourses.com. So marketplacesellercourses.com is the website, or they can find me on LinkedIn at Shannon Roddy. So yeah, definitely appreciate being on the show. Loved being able to engage and talk with you guys and share some really cool content and insight, and look forward to following up with anybody else who's interested to learn more about what we do.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon.
Always a pleasure, Shannon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
To find the show notes, which includes links to the articles and resources we discussed in this episode, go to sellersmile.com/017. If you have your own e-commerce customer service question you'd like us to answer on the show, send it to keepsmiling@sellersmile.com. If you found this conversation valuable, hit subscribe and you'll get the next episode straight to your device. Thanks again, and keep smiling.